910, Big 550, KTRS. Let's get right to it. There's a brand new book. It's called Kitty Genovese, The Murder, the Bystanders, the Crime That Changed America. It was New York City, 1964, that when it all happened. The author is Kevin Cook, and he joins us. Good morning, Kevin. Thanks for joining us here on the Big 550, KTRS in St. Louis.
Good morning, McGraw. How are you?
The name Kitty Genovese is not well as known as the story. I mean, it was huge when it happened, but 50 years later, people kind of know the story, but it's sort of faded, hasn't it?
I think that's true. A lot of people have a cloudy memory. Was that the young woman who was killed while none of her neighbors did anything to help her? I think that's how it's generally remembered. It's still taught in many psychology classes and sociology classes in college. I think that may be how most people are aware of it today.
Right. And is it true that Winston Moseley, the guy who was convicted, was just up for parole recently?
Yes, the killer comes up for parole every couple of years, and he is turned down reliably every couple of years. But I think he still has hope that he will be allowed out of prison. As the killer of Kitty Genovese once wrote in a New York Times op-ed story, he feels that it's unfair for him. The difficulty for victims in crimes, he believed, only lasted a few minutes, while he's had to pay for it his whole life.
Wow. Kevin Cook, our guest. The book is Kitty Genovese, The Murder, the Bystanders, the Crime That Changed America. Kevin, what was it that you wanted to spend time reliving and researching this story?
I was interested in the way that it had been told initially. I mean, for almost 2 weeks right after the crime, nobody paid a great deal of attention to this crime. It's one of 600-some murders in New York City that year. It's on the inside of the newspaper. It's only after the editor of the new city editor of the New York Times has lunch with the police chief that this becomes front-page news. The police chief, who was called Bull Murphy, didn't want to talk about a different subject that was coming up at lunch, and he changed the subject. He said, the big story is that killing in Queens, that 38 witnesses. There were 38 people watched that girl be killed, and the editor instantly perked up and thought, what a remarkable story. It turns out that number 38 is really what made the story stick and made the story both national and international news, and it was a mystery for many years why where that 38 came from. I think it's been misunderstood, and there were not 38 people looking out their windows watching while the crime happened.
Yeah, that's a great point. But this story was also pointed to, or the legacy of this is when neighbors don't help neighbors, but it also was pointed to as how bad New York is getting, was it not?
I think that's right, that it symbolized the city, what a horrible, dark, crime-ridden place the city had been. I think outside New York, it was pictured very often like the West Side Story or a neighborhood in which people are standing on their fire escapes looking down, watching this girl be killed over the course of half an hour. The neighborhood was nothing like that. The neighborhood was pretty crime-free. People left their doors open, their doors unlocked at night. It became not just for the community of Kew Gardens, the part of Queens where it happened, that's still known as, that's the place where Kitty Genovese was killed, but New York as maybe the darkest place that one could possibly imagine, and that's one of many outgrowths of this notorious crime.
The book is called Kitty Genovese, The Murder, the Bystanders, and the Crime That Changed America. 50 years, you blink your eyes, it's 50 years that this happened. So, Kevin Cook, what actually did happen that night?
Well, Kitty was stabbed on the sidewalk outside her building. Winston Moseley then fled when one of the neighbors raised his window and shouted, "Leave that girl alone." So the neighbors, at least one of the neighbors, took enough action to make him run. Kitty's then alone on the sidewalk for a minute or so. She manages to get up and stagger around a corner where she's no longer visible to the people in their windows on both sides of the street. She took shelter in an entryway in the back of the building where there was only one witness who was going to be able to see what had occurred to her when the killer came back to, as he put it later, to finish what he'd set out to do that night.
So that's the story. That's what actually happened. Where did all of this other stuff surrounding this come from? Did it come from that meeting with the police officer?
It did. It came from the front page story after the meeting with the police chief. The Times sent a reporter, Martin Gansberg, to Kew Gardens. He interviewed a lot of neighbors. Many had heard her screaming. Some of them, by the time you get to the window, there's nothing left to see. Some of them had wondered what had happened. Some may well have had a chance to pick up the telephone and call the police and didn't. There was no 911 system at that time. In fact, there was a couple who looked out the window and thinking of calling the police, and one said, "Oh, must have been 20 people, 30 people have called the police by now." There was a great deal of confusion, and I think the specificity of that number 38 made people forget how much confusion there actually was that night in Kew Gardens.
You also found a treasure trove, what they say, of lost documents. What did you find, and why were they lost in such an important case?
Well, the case, has not been tried for many years. There were several appeals that Winston Moseley, the killer, had, so you need the documents when the appeals come up. But it was a situation in which there were a great many police records, court records, transcripts, correction department materials, and stories from both contemporaneous and later down through the years. It's one of those moments when you realize that these papers haven't been looked at in maybe 10 years or 20 years, and it's a great window into what really did happen, and that's what fascinates me. The simple story that 38 witnesses looked out and did nothing certainly changed the world. It was very interesting to me to find out why that's not true.
Yeah. How did they catch Winston Moseley?
Well, he was stealing a television set. Not a very good idea, but that's how he had gotten into crime in the first place. He had a father who ran a TV repair shop, and he would steal appliances and take them to his father. He was doing that in Queens not long after he killed Kitty Genovese, and strangely enough, the neighbors took action. The neighbors asked him, "What are you doing there?" He said he was helping one of their friends move. They knew it wasn't so. They called the police. The police picked up Moseley for burglary, and he began confessing to murder.
Who was Marianne Zelenko?
Yes, she was Kitty's partner. Most people didn't know that Kitty was gay. The newspapers tended to keep it out of their coverage unless you read the code, which said she moved with a fast crowd or lived a bohemian life. The prosecution and defense kept it out of the trial. Particularly, the prosecution felt that they didn't want to suggest that Kitty was gay to the jury because the jury might have thought less of her.
Is this the first time the full story is being told?
There was a book 50 years ago by the editor, A.M. Rosenthal, the editor of the Times, that he produced a very short book called 38 Witnesses a few months after the crime. And there hasn't been a full-length book on the Kitty Genovese case since then.
What's so amazing, Kevin Cook, the book is called Kitty Genovese, The Murder, the Bystanders, and the Crime That Changed America. And I guess you as a journalist and me as a talk show host have to keep this in mind, is that facts are important. And once a non-fact takes hold, it's really hard to change the story after somebody believes something that just isn't true.
Yeah, absolutely true. And the odd thing is there are generations of people who know Kitty Genovese only as a case study in a psychology textbook. And it winds up in the next psychology textbook in the same language, and the next one after that, and the next one after that. Although sometimes these things get retold and the details get changed again. If you ever saw the movie Boondock Saints, it begins with a priest in a holiday mass telling the story of this woman, Kitty Genovese, who was slain in broad daylight in view of all of her neighbors. So we've even moved it from the darkness into the light.
Wow.
In that case.
Kevin Cook, wish we had more time. The book is called Kitty Genovese, The Murder, The Bystanders and the Crime That Changed America. Kevin, thank you very much for your work. Good luck with the book.
Thanks for a good talk.
You got it. 9:20 here on the Big 550 KTR.